So the next talk is about Metadata Hub, Alfresco Metadata Hub. Robin Bramley is a known face inside Alfresco ecosystem in general. Which is your first talk?
So I did one in BeeCon 2011.
Okay, so BeeCon 2011 is pretty experienced, so I think you will have something to learn from him. So thank you, Robin, and
thank you, Francesco. So I'm going to be talking about Alfresco as a metadata hub, and I'm from Chief Scientific Officer at Ipsos, and we've been working with Alfresco for a long time. I started with version 0.6 back in September 2005, and the main difference on this slide from last year's one is that we are now a wholly owned subsidiary of Copyright Clearance Centre, having been acquired in May last year. And also, as alluded to, you may remember me from presentations such as BeeCon 2011, etc. So to use Alfresco as a metadata hub, we're going to explore a little bit about metadata first. So meta is, we're looking at that third case. It's something that describes its own subject. So in essence, metadata is data about data. And I found this photo last year, and it kind of touched a chord. So metadata is a love note to the future. And why is that? It's mainly because it empowers discovery. So to use a famous Shakespeare quote, if metadata be the food of love, they aren't. So what does Alfresco give you out of the box in terms of metadata support? So the first thing to understand, as I'm pretty sure everyone will know about Alfresco, is that it's a node store. It stores nodes. And this is one of the key foundations that makes it a lot more powerful than a file server, because these nodes aren't just content files, they've got metadata wrapped around them. But nodes by themselves, it's just a bunch of nodes. So the next construct that people learn about with Alfresco is typically the type model. So this helps you drive behavior because you can actually know what each file is meant to be, the content it represents. So in this example, we're showing inheritance hierarchy. So we've got a base document that's extending the standard out-of-the-box content, and then we've specialized it with an article and a presentation. And it's important to understand that nodes can only have one type. So with a simple model, you can do it now within the admin console of Alfresco. But typically we don't actually use this on our project because we follow those staged release processes. So everything needs to go through testing, UAT, and staging before it gets deployed to production. But here you can see those types that we just saw on a previous slide. And there are also a couple of limitations with the model manager, such as it's not as easy to create all the different types of properties, which leads neatly on to the next slide. So properties are actually what allows us to capture the metadata values. So you can have numbers, dates, date times, booleans, you can have checkboxes, text, and then multilingual text. You can also specify whether it's mandatory or optional. You can then have multiple values. You can capture many different things in one particular field, and you can constrain it. So we've got in the bottom the sort of properties form, so you can see some of the basic standard out-of-the-box fields there. And then when you move into constraints, you can actually say, well, actually, I don't want you just to enter complete garbage in here. You can either have sort of regular expressions, so you can force an email address to actually obey the rules of email addresses, or phone numbers is another example. You can then specify for numbers, a minimum maximum value. You can also set length constraints for strings, or again, as illustrated on the screenshot, you can have a list. So you can give a list of values and actually force your user to give you something you want. And lastly, there's also custom, so you can write your own Java classes for these constraints. So coming back to that earlier point about nodes only having one type, how do you generally work around that? So an aspect gives you a way of having sort of cross-cutting concerns. So here we see an extension of that original type model, where we've now got an Acme namespace as well, and they've got a document and an invoice, and then we've got two nodes, one's an article and one's an invoice. An aspect tends to come in two flavours, so there's either applying that common metadata that you want to be able to have across different types, and then the other case is behaviour. So often they're combined, so as we can see we've got versionable, this will hold the minor revision, the major revision, but also it's an indication to the system that there's special behaviour around this node. And then the second one is kind of a work in progress, so this is kind of a marker aspect. And the marker is purely for behaviour purposes. There's no metadata associated with it. So, that's great. We can have these types, and we know what they all are, and potentially how the system should handle them. But, they can't really exist in isolation. So you then move on to associations. So this is building that tree structure. And here we're just illustrating the sort of classic contained parent-child relationship. So we've got a company home at the top. It contains a set of collaboration sites, site A and site B. There's document libraries in both of those sites, and we can see we've got file 1 and file 2. So those are kind of the basic constructs of the content repository. So when users, if they migrate from a file server environment, the typical way they'll go around discovering information is using their old habits. And that really leaves them with browsing. So here we can start to see that we've got the parent-child relationships exposed, but also down the left-hand side, we start to see some of the other metadata that can be applied. So, categories is hidden, but we can see that there are some tags that have been applied to this content. Once users have got fed up of clicking around that file folder tree, not being able to find what they want, they then tend to move to search. So in this case, we've got a site scope search and a list of results. Again, the search itself, at this level, the user doesn't understand necessarily what is being searched, whether it's the text and the metadata, but we can see we've got properties down the left-hand side that we can filter our search results by using the facets. But also you can then sort your results, again, using more metadata. When they still can't find what they want, they might then move to advanced search. And out of the box, you get the ability to specify a few more fields. So you can actually say, I want to search just in the title or just in the name. And you can pick the MIME types without having to resort to more complex FTS syntax. But luckily, it's fairly straightforward to then configure advanced search with config evaluators. So in this case, and unfortunately it's slightly hidden on the, we've got a specific Acme contract type up here. And then with an evaluator, Share understands that because they've chosen that type, there are these additional fields that can be specified, so that we can hone in on a particular type of content within the strongly typed content model. And this is nicely described now in the sort of developer guide extension points for the content model. As you start to often see more out-of-the-box deployments, they'll start to use categories. So categories are hierarchical taxonomy that you can use to classify individual documents. Historically, you used to be able to do more path-based searching with this. So searching for Europe up here would have brought back all of these documents. That was, for performance reasons, that was altered a number of versions ago. And consequently, these things are actually double classified. So they're classified as Spain and as Europe, so that it'll appear at if you search at different levels. So all of the metadata in those screenshots was entered using standard out-of-the-box property forms. But this tends to generate a bit of friction. So if you have too much friction, then the users are going to enter little to no metadata, and you therefore defeat the point of the object. And also Alfresco supports many protocols that don't really align with metadata standards. So a lot of the old file-based protocols, so FTP, WebDAV, CIFS, etc., they're not really intended to work with the properties. They're just dumb file protocols. So one of the ways that we try to address this friction is a component we built in-house called all-in-one edit. So the idea is that rather than having to edit some content, upload it, fill in a form, or be able to edit in line and then fill in the properties form, is that it's all in one place. So you can actually have the context of what you're editing and set the metadata at the same time. And you can see on the right-hand side there's lots of different metadata properties there. And the idea is to reduce some of that friction. So if you're forcing people to enter metadata, make it easy for them. So coming back to the Shakespeare quote, does anyone know the next line of this quote? I can see some people thinking now. Okay, I'll let you off the hook. So, if music be the food of love, play on. Give me excess of it, that surfeiting the appetite may sicken and so die. So my point here, in this context, is that too much metadata on one item can be noise. That signal-to-noise ratio coming in when you're trying to find information. And also too much time entering metadata, and the quality is going to drop. And if you have too many mandatory properties, again, that quality is going to drop. The user is going to start typing ASDF through the text fields, and again, you've defeated the point of the object with discovery. So the next kind of tactic to help address that is automation. So out of the box, obviously we've got Apache Tika. So Apache Tika supports many different file MIME types and how to extract the common properties out of them for Alfresco. For our publishing clients, we deal with a lot of XML, so you can use an XPath extractor, and you can write XPath statements, and it will navigate down the XML tree and pull out either attributes or field values, and then you can map metadata properties to put them into. Another kind of fairly common strategy is to then inherit metadata from a parent. So we can get the context from where what a user's doing and where they're putting something. So in this case, we've got a document library with an invoices space under it, and we put some files in there. Like as not, those are going to be invoices. So we can actually, either through rules or other means, attach metadata to those, and then it's easier to surface those. And that approach can be used also to use rules to apply the types straight into that folder. So a rule on the invoices folder, anything coming in here, change its type. And then we start to look at deriving metadata. So what can we glean? So you don't always have nice file formats that have XMP embedded metadata in them, but in some places I'm sure people have worked, there have been strict file naming conventions going along with project codes, having the date in, and actually having a sort of semantic file name. So what does it mean? And in this case, not only can you derive metadata from it, but you can also make the user's life easier. So you can create a kind of a drop zone filing system for them, give them a single folder, they dump stuff in, and if there's enough context in there, then it can automatically file it in the right place in the repository for them. So back to kind of the main aim of the talk is to talk about Alfresco as a metadata hub. So as a hub, we've got a few responsibilities. We've got to collect the metadata, ingest that metadata, maybe augment and curate it, and then deliver that metadata out. So what does that look like at a high level on some of our common projects? So Alfresco in the middle as that hub, and then out at the spoke. So on the left-hand side, a product information management system. So in publishing, they often have a bibliographic metadata system. So this manages all their titles, and so we understand the context of the products that users are creating in Alfresco. So we quite often have to pull in information from there, and that may use standards such as Onyx and have a bulk feed, or we may be looking it up an ISBN at a time as a user creates a new product in Alfresco. We then have kind of bulk metadata spreadsheet that I'll touch on shortly, and then on the right hand side, output systems. So some of these are, some may take just metadata. So the search may just take metadata. It may not necessarily have a full text index. The channel partner may just be interested in essentially a catalogue of products. So give me this metadata out. And the e-commerce system may or may not take, say, PDF ebooks along with that catalogue metadata. So, to sum it up in some of the more complex metadata gathering approaches, sort of building on top of those earlier, more out-of-the-box type ones. We've got that integration with product information management system, a bulk metadata import, and again, that's not necessarily automated, but one of the add-ons we've created for Alfresco is a bulk metadata template. So essentially, someone can upload 1,000 images that they've just bought from stock file, and then say, actually, give me a metadata template, and I'm going to get someone to fill in this spreadsheet, and they will get 50 properties to fill in. And then further down, you start to look at machine learning and semantic extraction from text. And the last one leads nicely onto looking at trends and standards. So, I'm a firm believer that a good presentation should probably include an XKCD cartoon, and this one is quite relevant because we've got all these standards, but we need one standard to unify them all. So you end up with one more standard. And as we talk about metadata, one of the most relevant standards for the last decade is the resource descriptor framework, because our content or data is a resource, and the metadata is going to describe that resource. So this RDF is a standard from the World Wide Web Consortium, and it's based around triples. So it's a brilliant simplification that you can describe all knowledge using a triple format, so a subject, predicate, and object. So John knows Jane, or document A is a contract. And these triples then form a directed graph which you can navigate. And if you start to use open ontologies, then you can actually, with open data, you can expose or link in other data that uses similar ontologies. So this is the linked open data cloud, and it's not quite as legible as it was a few years ago. But basically all of these are different ontologies that describe data, and you can access data described by those ontologies. And this big pink stuff on the right-hand side, that's all kind of life sciences data, and then there's government data sets and publishing data sets, etc. And part of the relevance of that is that when you look at how you're going to push metadata out to upstream systems, it's a really good idea to employ open standards, and the interoperability is one of those reasons. So we take content objects, so nodes from Alfresco, and then we look at how we can serialize those out as triples. So in this example, we've got kind of the document library, got the document library, and then we've got file 1, and then we've got an association between file 1 and file 2, and some sort of category information that's classifying file 1. And then you can serialize that out into a set of triples that can then form parts of that graph. So we have the document library contains file 1. File 1 has a particular type. So again, there are some of these things aren't visible on the diagram. So we can then take those different metadata properties. File 1 has a title, file 1 has a description, file 1 has an author, and then we get down file 1 is, it is classified by category A, file 1 is classified by category B, and then there's some relationship between file 1 and file 2, and whatever that may have been modelled within the repository. And that's actually, there are a number of different ways of doing this, and if you also have enriched content within the metadata, then you can actually end up with triples at multiple levels. So you can have kind of this atom of RDF XML that describes the triples about the document, but then you can also have inline annotations, so RDFA, that's very specific. This particular word is about the thing. So one of the things that can happen on some of our projects is we have inline annotation of content, and then when we go to publish out, if it's the content rather than just pure metadata, then we can enrich the sort of header of the XML or HTML with RDF. And then in terms of more complex needs, this is where you have to start asking yourself some kind of tough questions. So, where is that tipping point for share? So, if you start to have particular metadata standards you have to support, some of the more complex XML ones will have nested structures or repeating elements or related ordered name value pairs, and then you're kind of working against the grain of what share is providing for you. And yes, there are ways of crowbarring it into share, so things like alpaca forms may be helpful, but again, you're creating something that's going to be harder to maintain. And then you also need to understand some of the limitations of the repository itself. So, one of Alfresco's key strengths is its content model, but then in some cases you may find that it's lacking some of the flexibility that you need. So, one of the classic examples people talk about is a JSON document. Okay, you throw it into a document database and bang, I haven't had to define this schema. Also, the internal model of the repository itself is actually proprietary rather than being stored using an open standard itself. And it's tricky, those two things make it tricky to model some of the metadata standards. And also, as you start to build a more complex model with lots of associations, then you start to trip up the associative searches are weak in Alfresco, and you have to do a more brute force crawl. And as I said earlier, many of the old file protocols don't support metadata capture, which kind of leads neatly onto the reminder of don't forget Jetpot's anti-patterns. So there's a link in the slides. So anti-pattern 3 is talking about highly relational solutions. So that's that weak associative search point. And anti-pattern 4 is JSON and XML. If you're storing lots of those in Alfresco, how are you making them more discoverable? And again, I think there are ways of doing it, but if you're purely doing that, Jeff's point is, have you made the right decision? And then again, if you are just using Alfresco for metadata, that kind of is number 5. Whereas a lot of our projects, metadata is complementary to the content that's being worked on. So if you've got lots and lots of contentless objects, is Alfresco the right choice? And some of these limitations, or you can work around these, and sometimes it's easier if your solution is using Alfresco as a sort of headless content repository rather than having a heavily customized sharing, because you can make different choices. So, in conclusion, Alfresco content services with share is a great foundation for a metadata hub. It's got content modeling. There's easy ways of using workflow and forms out of the box to help curate and enrich the metadata, and it's easy to integrate. So as John said this morning, there's those open principles, the open source, open standards, open architecture. It's got Spring underpinnings. There's the node crawler from the transfer service, so you can kind of do that brute force crawl through the tree. And there's capabilities that you can build on to take these objects and then create the output. There you go. Thank you very much. One thing I forgot to say earlier is that all-in-one edit component is built using ADF. And if you want to find out more, then Mano's going to be talking on that tomorrow.
Thank you, Robin. A question from the room for Robin.
Stun them all into silence.
Okay, thank you very much, Robin. Really precise also in time, and thank you for that.